In 2014, two small developers, Eliza Velasquez and Nightmargin, created a game called Oneshot, a game where player controlled a cat-like child named Niko and saved a dying world by restoring its son. The game was pretty unique at the time due to the fact that it would literally end if the player accidentally closed the game. On top of that, you can't reset the progress and revive Niko without going into your computer's root folder. True to its name, the game is literally a one-shot. Yet despite that uniqueness, the game failed to win the Indie Game Maker contest. This is due to the fact that the game was being developed using a modded RPG Maker 2003 engine, leading to the game's disqualification. However, all was not lost. A game company named Degika Games, who later rebranded as Komodo Hawaii, took an interest in their game and offered to publish it. This allowed them to perfect the game and include everything that they originally envisioned for Oneshot. In 2016, Michael Schurz joined the development team, and together with Nightmargin and Velasquez, the three of them formed the indie studio Future Cat. In that same year, they released the final version of Oneshot on Steam. A year later, on March 28, 2017, a new ending called Solstice was released. This ending solved the mysteries about the story and finally gave Niko a happy ending. Oneshot would later be ported to many different platforms over the years. The macOS version came out on May 31, 2018, while the Linux version came out a year later on April 24, 2019. Both the Linux and the Windows version were later released on itch.io on March 12, 2020. A year later, in 2021, the game was rebuilt from the ground up using the new engine instead of RPG Maker. This version, titled Oneshot World Machine Edition, was exclusive to consoles until 2024, when that version was released on Steam. The game begins with a cat-like child waking up alone inside a dark room. This is Niko. And before anyone says anything, let me clarify that I will be calling Niko a he instead of a she. The game never specifies his gender, so it's up to us to decide that. For me, Niko is a he. Anyway, Niko turns on the computer and finds out that it's locked with a 4-digit password. The passwords are color-coded and they match the number on the remote control at the end of this room. When he picked it up, the numbers glowed under the moonlight, giving Niko the number 2614. Niko logs into the computer and he is greeted with a sentient message that tells him that he's already too late and not much of the world remains, which will be apparent once he go outside. The message box then tells him that the world was never worth saving and asks if he still wants to try. The text box then addressed the player by warning them about how their action will affect Niko and that it is their mission to help him leave. To really show that it meant business, the text box then appeared outside the game world and into the player's computer, where it warned them that they only have one shot at this, and then proceed to call the player by their computer's name. Freaky. Side note here, this is Oneshot's best feature ever. The game will break the fourth wall and will mess with your computer. It's not malicious or anything, so don't worry. After that message, Niko hears the sound of the door unlocking, allowing him to leave the room. In the next room, Niko noticed a fireplace and a broken TV with sparks coming out. Now, before we continue on, let's talk about the mechanic of this game. Throughout Niko's journey, he will be solving puzzles, and these puzzles often required him to combine several items. Like the one in the living room right now, Niko needs to combine a branch dipped in alcohol to make a fire. After solving the puzzle, Niko obtains a key to the basement and proceeds through it. Once he reached down the basement, he picked up a light bulb that instantly shines brighter than my future. Niko then returns to the living room, inserts the light bulb into the door, and a few seconds later, Niko finds himself in a new place. He steps out and we are presented with a view of a gigantic tower looming in the distance. I think I should probably mention the region we're in since it'll be brought up later on. There are 3 regions in this world. Right now, we are in the Barrens. The second region is called Glen, and the final region is called the Refuge. That is where the tower is located. Anyway, Niko continues his exploration and finds a robot named Prophetbot. Prophetbot recognized the light bulb that Niko was holding and immediately welcomed him. He then asked Niko how he arrived in this world. When Niko answered that he woke up inside a dark room, Prophetbot immediately called him the Messiah. This confused Niko, which led to Prophetbot explaining their history and Niko's objective. Basically, the world had lost its son. A prophecy was then foretold about a savior who would restore the world's sun by putting the light bulb into the tower. Since Niko was holding the light bulb, that savior is none other than him. Somehow understanding, Niko then asked about the computer inside the house where he saw the message box that says our action will affect Niko. He was confused by the computer mentioned his name. Prophetbot explained that the message was for their god who is now accompanying Niko. He then teaches him how to communicate with us and we get another treat of fourth wall breaking. Anyway, after all his questions were answered, Niko continued his exploration. He then stumbled upon a place with a bed inside and realized that he's a bit tired from all the walking, so he asked the player for their permission to go to sleep. When the player answered yes, the game closed by itself. The next time the game boot up, we get to see Niko dreaming about his hometown. This can happen several times if we decide to let Niko sleep on the bed. After getting enough rest, Niko continued on and eventually reached the lookout area where he met Silver. She at first mistook him for a cat, but Niko quickly refuted that with a logical explanation. Cats walk on 4 legs. Somehow accepting that explanation, Silver then mentioned how she knew he was the Messiah and advised him to let the world die by itself. But Niko refused that suggestion because he wants to save it. Silver then mentioned how nobody could comprehend the tower's power, and if Niko is adamant on saving the world, then the tower might just send him back home. Excited to hear this, Niko wasted no time and headed out. Before exploring the other parts of the Barrens, Niko visits a cave not too far from Silver's house. Here, he noticed a strange glow at the end of the tunnel, but when he tried to get close to it, Silver stopped him because it was dangerous. She then mentioned someone who went there not too long ago but never returned. Now, do keep this place in mind because we'll come to this place much later on. For now, Niko explores the other part of the Barrens and eventually fixes the generator, restoring electricity and reviving every robot in the region. Since electricity is back, Niko opens the computer just outside of the generator room and the sentient text box greeted the player. It told them that their progression will stop here because they needed a code to unlock a certain box. That code doesn't exist in this world. Notice how the word "this" was all in caps. This is a hint that the code is in our computer/document folder. So with that info, we open the documents folder where we'll find a single text file called document.oneshot. Opening this text file, we can see jumbled text on it, and on the bottom we can see the number 458846. With the code obtained, Niko returns to the cliffside and opens the metal safe with the help from the player. Inside the safe, there's a gas mask and a strange book. This book will be important much later on, but for now, Niko can't do anything about it because he can't read it. As he was about to leave, a strange glitch appeared. Now, this glitch will appear in some part of the region. The people of this world called it a square glitch and will avoid it at all costs. Not much is known about it until later in the game, so it's best to just leave it for now. With the gas mask obtained, Niko can safely travel through the dangerous gassy area up on the north and enter the chemical factory. Here, he found a piece of paper with instruction on how to create a bottle of acid. This bottle of acid is for robot number 310. A robot who can take Niko to the nearest location of the tower, which is the Glen region. Problem is, he's a bit rusty, but with this bottle of acid, Robot can finally move again, right? Well, no. Turns out, Robot's navigation system was damaged beyond repair. However, he reassured Niko that there is a solution and told him to meet with the head engineer. The head engineer is none other than Silver, so Niko returns to the outpost and immediately tells Silver about his situation. Silver then handed him her ember necklace and told Niko that Robot has the ability to track material from their source location. Before leaving, Niko asked if there's anything he could do for her since this will be the last time he'll see her. Silver goes quiet for a moment before asking if they could play chess. The two of them have a friendly match where Niko loses to Silver. Here we also hear the term taming, which won't be explained until much later in the game. Anyway, satisfied with their friendly match, Niko bids her farewell and returns to the dock. He showed the necklace to Robot, who then scans it to confirm the next location. Niko hops in the boat and is taken to the new region. Upon arriving in the new area, Niko enters the building and climbs the stair to the roof. When he gets to the top, we get a shot of this beautiful view of the whole place. Welcome to Glen, a flooding grassland in which the main population is bird people. There's nothing exciting here except a few ruins to explore. To the north, there's a settlement of strange bird-like people. Going down to the south is the home of robot scientists? Look, they're doing some kind of a research here, okay? On his way to the settlement, Niko met Calamus, who instantly recognized him as the savior because of the light bulb that he's holding. He explained to Niko that his sister has been missing for 3 days now and described her appearance. Niko then asked where he last saw her and promised to look for her while he's out exploring. Calamus mentioned that his sister was last seen in the ruin. Before heading there, Niko visits the robot settlement first and pick up a tube of water. This will be important later on. After much exploring, Niko arrived at the ruin in the northeast. As he goes down the stairs, he can see some of the entrance were blocked up by vines. There's even a pathway guarded by a robot that was blocked by a block. Yeah, no kidding. Niko literally couldn't go through this place because of a tiny block blocking his way. The dev knows how to be funny. As Niko went deeper into the ruin, he stumbles upon another computer, and as soon as it turns on, the sentient text box appeared and greeted the player. It asked the player to help Niko and gave them a hint for the next puzzle. If you're playing this on full screen, the game will minimize and we can see that the entity has changed our wallpaper into a picture of a light bulb. This isn't permanent though, so don't worry about it. Exploring the ruin even deeper, Niko comes across a dying plant lady. The lady immediately recognized Niko as the savior and asked if she could hold the sun. Since she's on the verge of dying, Niko granted her wish and left the light bulb with her. With her wish fulfilled, the plant lady removed the vines and Niko is able to go through. Inside the room, there's a similar pattern much like the ones on our wallpaper, and next to it is an entrance blocked by some kind of a glitch. After solving the puzzle, a bird-like person emerged from that blocked entrance. This person is Alula, Calamus' missing sister. Niko returns to Calamus with Alula, and as soon as they're reunited, Alula talks about her experience being stuck inside the ruin. Apparently, she got trapped inside because while she was exploring the room, the glitch suddenly appeared and blocked off her exit. Calamus then explained the danger of the glitch to Niko and then invited him to their home as thanks. Upon arriving at their home, Alula gave Niko a glowing feather. According to Calamus, this is a sacred feather that belongs to the Great Prophet. Before leaving, Niko gets to explore the backside of the siblings' home where he discovers a path that leads to the sacred burial ground. There's nothing Niko can do here at the moment, so we'll leave this place for now. Niko returns to the plant lady to pick up the light bulb, but when he gets there, she is nowhere to be seen. But in her place is a seed. Side note here, I know the game called it a kernel of corn, but to me, it's much more of a seed. Also, this seed can be planted in a special area in the refuge. Remember that tube of water I mentioned earlier? Niko can combine it with a growing agent to accelerate its growth. Doing this will revive the plant lady. Anyway, Niko then continues his exploration and arrives at a gate guarded by a giant robot. The robot won't allow him to enter unless he writes his name. Fortunately, Niko has the feather given by the siblings, and using a paint dye he gets from a trader as ink, he's able to write his name on the gate entrance and finally enters the refuge. Finally arriving in the refuge, Niko is one step closer to the tower, but according to the robot nearby, there is no known way to enter it. He suggests Niko visit the library to look for clues. On his way there, he met Plight the lamplighter, who seems to be having trouble with the elevator. Approaching him, he will tell Niko that the ground button on the elevator was missing and because of that, the elevator will not function properly. This is a problem for both of them since this elevator is the only way for them to go down. So Niko promised him that he'll find a way to fix it. Heading to the pathway on the right side, Niko enters a cafe and meets Ling, the cafe worker. She told Niko about the cafe's lack of customer due to the city's infrastructure breaking down. She then offers to cook for Niko, but he refused. For now, Ling then mentioned how Plight was also in this cafe earlier searching for the missing elevator button, and then she joked about how the only ground she saw was the ground coffee, which is conveniently on the floor next to Niko. You know, I should be laughing here, if it's not for the fact that this is literally how we'll get the button. Look, it'll make sense soon. Niko picked up the ground coffee next to him and then proceeded on. He entered an apartment building and eventually ended up inside a toilet. Here, he picked up a scissor on a pile of hairs. Looks like someone was going through a hard breakup. Jokes aside, remember what I said about the ground coffee joke earlier? Well, using the scissors, Niko cut off the metal can into a button shape and also the word ground, and then used the tape he found in another building to tape them together to create a makeshift button. You see how ridiculous that is? There's no way it will work, right? Well, there's only one way to find out. But before leaving, Niko enters the room next to where he found the tape, and inside he found another computer. When he turned it on, the computer printed out a transparent film and asked the player to expose it to the void. This is sort of confusing if you're playing this blindly, but essentially the computer gave Niko a film and by inspecting it, rows of numbers appeared. What we need to do here is to drag this through the edge of the screen. Do this for both sides and we'll get the code 63014, the code to activate the elevator. Before leaving this place, going up to the stairs will take Niko to a locked metal door. This, much like the cave in the sacred burial, can only be accessed later on, so we'll return here much later. For now, Niko returns to where Plight is and used the makeshift button on the elevator. Surprisingly, it worked. Huh. Who would have thought? With the elevator now functioning again, both of them could finally go down. After an awkward elevator ride between the two of them, they finally arrive on the ground floor. Plight excused himself to do his work while Niko continued on to the library. On his way to the library, he finds a fox in an alleyway and decides to follow it. This is Rue, and she led him to a small area with a giant tree. Rue apologizes to Niko for appearing because she's not allowed to talk to him yet. Yeah, you guessed it. This is the same thing as the locked metal door, the cave, and the sacred burial ground. We'll come back for her later. Continuing on, Niko finally arrived at the library and asked the robot librarian for any clues about the tower. The robot told him that only George, the head librarian, can answer that, and proceed to call her. But after waiting for a while without an answer, the robot librarian concludes that George is busy with her work and explains that when she's concentrating on her work, she'll ignore everything. This can go on for several days. Niko was surprised to hear this since he didn't have the luxury to wait that long, so he asked if the robot librarian could get her to calm down, but he refused since leaving this post is not in his programming. When Niko attempted to go up there on his own, the robot librarian stopped him because he didn't have a library card, so without much of a choice, Niko had to get one. The process to get a library card is a bit complicated. First off, Niko had to solve this factory puzzle, which is more of a memory type puzzle. You need to light up all 5 lights correctly and you only get 9 retries. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, no. Because every time you change a color, you need to check whether you got the right colors or not, and while you're doing that, the amount of retries you can do goes down by 1. Get it to 0 and you'll have to start all over again. Now, the good news here is that even if you restart, the pattern won't change, which is a good thing because imagine if every time you fail, the color pattern change. I would be pissed off. Once Niko completes the puzzle, he finally gets to meet Kip, who apologized to him because she didn't turn off the security lock. Niko mentioned wanting a library card so that he could go and meet with George. Kip then gave her own card but realized one problem. The robot librarian has facial recognition and will notice something is wrong since the card doesn't match Niko's. She then jokingly suggested to Niko that he should tape his own picture to the card, which is exactly what he did. By fixing the camera he found inside one of the buildings, Niko was able to take several pictures and tape it onto Kip's library card. He then presented it to the robot librarian and was finally able to go up and meet with George. When he entered George's room, she was already expecting him. She explained to him that she knew about a small room in that tower, but unfortunately she didn't know how to enter it. That's too bad. If only there was a book that can explain— Wait, remember that book that we got from the metal safe back in the Barrens? What if we gave it to George? Niko handed her the journal he found, and as George looked through it, she realized that the content needed to be translated first. But it might take a while, so she suggested Niko to rest in the guest room while she did her work. Niko agrees since he's tired from all that walking and hops onto the bed. The next time we open the game again, we get to see Niko dreaming about his mother, and then a few moments later, a shot of the broken light bulb can be seen. Niko instantly wakes up and wants to say something but decides not to. Returning to George, who just finished translating the book, she found out that the journal's content was meant for the player. It begins by greeting the player and telling them that if they're able to read this, that means they're close to the tower. It then explained that the tower is the home of an entity who is connected to the world and communicates with them through electronic devices such as the computer. It then tells the player where the tower's entry point is and how they needed 3 items as well. George later explained that these 3 items are called pieces of the sun. These items are the ember, the glowing feather, and a glowing dice. The last one was given by George herself. Lastly, the journal tells the player that Niko won't be able to do anything there, so it's up to them to guide him by looking at the pattern on the floor. After obtaining all of the items, Niko returns to the cafe for a quick meal. Now, remember that nightmare he had? Well, here we learn that Niko was having nightmares because he was having doubt about his mission and himself. He also had a bad feeling about this whole thing. Ling calmed him down and reassured him that everything will be fine and that once this is over, Niko will definitely return home. This cheered him up a bit and he continued eating his meal. Once he's done with his meal, Niko returns to the factory and enters a small room with a giant X on the floor. Now at this point, it's safe to close the game since the giant X on the floor is literally the close button. After we press the X button, this happened. Niko wakes up inside a dark and empty void. He called out to the player but didn't receive an answer. He wanders around until eventually he finds a computer where for the first time since he woke up in that empty room in the Barrens, the entity finally addresses him. The entity explained to Niko that the player has left and won't be returning. When Niko asked why, the entity explained that the player had fulfilled their mission and so had Niko. It then manifested a bed for him to rest and reassured him that once he wakes up, he will return home. Niko was reluctant at first, but in the end, he chose to trust the entity and went to bed. The text box then appeared outside of the game world, and with a condescending tone, it tells the player that their work here is done and that they shouldn't return to this world. As soon as it was done giving a warning, the game closed on its own. Now at this point, we are left wondering if this is truly the end of the game. Because if we try to reopen it, it will automatically close. So that means it's over, right? Well, no. Digging through the one-shot files in the documents section, we'll see a new application inside. This app has a shape of a 3-leaf clover, and when we opened it, a new window popped out with the 3-leaf clover in the middle, and simultaneously our wallpaper changed into a note left by the author. The note told us that this is not over yet. Regardless of what the entity told the player earlier, the story is far from over. It then tells them to relaunch the game after opening the Clover application, and upon doing so, brings them back into the game. We then get to see Niko's dream and called out his name. As soon as Niko woke up, he immediately called the player's name but received no answer. But when he reached into his pocket, he found a black clover. When interacted, the clover appeared on the bottom right of the screen. Niko then turned on the computer, and as soon as he booted up, the entity was shocked to find out that he's still here. Realizing that Niko couldn't have done it all alone, it then manifested the text box outside the game world and confronted the player. The entity asked them why they decided to come back into this world since the entity never planned on continuing the game. And then in a fit of rage, the entity trapped Niko in that world without any way out. When we return to the game, a single door appeared. Upon entering, Niko is transported to an endless maze-like area where all paths lead to nowhere. It seems like he has no way out, but remember that book that George translated earlier? In that book, it mentioned that Niko won't be able to do anything once he arrives at the tower. So it's up to the player to guide him by looking at the pattern. The pattern mentioned is the clover on the bottom right of the screen. To get through this maze, we need to match the clover pattern with the clover application that we opened earlier, which has now transformed into a note with guides on which path is the right way to go. As the player navigates through the right pathway shown by the author, they get a little backstory on the entity's identity and its goal and purpose. As they near the exit, the author reveals that the sun is tied to the Messiah. As long as it remains in this world, Niko could never leave the place. The author then begged the player to destroy the light bulb so that Niko could go home. After that message, Niko exited the maze-like area and found the light bulb laying on the ground. After a brief conversation with the player, Niko picked it up and was instantly transported back to the basement inside the empty house in the Barrens. The house is still the same as before, except for the exit door. The exit door now took Niko into another hallway. As he moved through it, the entity attempted to contact the player once again. This time, it asked them why they're so adamant in saving the world when it was not even worth saving. It then tells them that Niko is the only one worth saving because he's not from this world. Finally, before reaching the elevator, the entity reminds the player that they only have one shot in this game and that if they really care about Niko, they should choose to destroy the light bulb so that Niko could go home. This is the last message from the entity before it completely stopped talking. Niko then boarded the elevator, and on his way up, he excitedly told the player that he can't wait to go home and asked if they feel the same way. When the player didn't answer him, Niko asked what's wrong, and the player explained that Niko cannot do both. He had to choose whether to save the world or go back home. Niko then asked if there's any other way, but the player just replied with, "I don't know." After that, the elevator door opens and Niko is presented with a choice between returning the sun or go home. Since saving the world was Niko's objective from the start, and not only that, he grew to like the people here, Niko chooses to return the sun. Before putting the light bulb into its place, Niko thanked the player and told him that he'll be okay. He then put the light bulb into the socket and a bright light engulfed the entire area. The game ends with the world slowly getting brighter, with the residents cheering for the return of their beloved son, not realizing that Niko had saved them at the cost of sacrificing his own life. Now, this should have been the end, right? Because when we open the game, it'll just close on its own. There's truly no way to return. It's over, right? Or is it? Inside the documents folder, a note was left by the author. In that note, the author acknowledges that whatever ending that we choose for Niko, the author knew that we weren't satisfied with it and knew that we wanted to return and change it. But sadly, we couldn't. Even the author couldn't do it. There is a reason why the entity called it one shot. It was to prevent us from returning and changing the ending. The author knows that there was a restriction implemented a long time ago by the entity which even he couldn't remove. Unless you're not from that world. The author then suggests we look for a save file inside the documents folder and delete it. Locating the save file was not hard. It is literally below the Black Clover application. When we delete it, we are able to return to the game. Finally, a fresh start. We can change Niko's fate. We can help him get
Player
So, when One Shot first came out, the ending you got was pretty depressing. You either accepted the ending where the world regains its son at the cost of Niko disappearing forever, or Niko goes home but at the cost of the world slowly dying. To make matters worse, once you went through with either ending, you couldn't return to the game. It wouldn't allow you to return unless you knew how to get into the root of your computer and delete a specific file. That is, until the Solstice update came out. The Solstice update not only attempted to give Niko a happy ending but also gave players a second chance on this game. Starting a new game, the players will immediately notice that everything looks and plays the same until we get to the part when Niko wakes up. Immediately he calls out the player's name but then wonders why he even did that. This is the first hint that everything will be different in this route. Another thing that the player will notice is that the journal that Niko translated from the first run now sits in his inventory. Anyway, after unintentionally calling out the player's name, things will play out similarly to the first run until Niko turns on the computer, and the first thing the player will notice is that the computer doesn't need a numbered password anymore, but instead they need to type in a specific word. This password can be found by reopening the Black Clover application located in the Documents folder. Opening up the application, the player will receive a note from the author who congratulated them for removing the restriction. The content of the note is pretty much the author rambling about how he wants the player to save Niko and everyone else because he felt the ending he gave Niko previously was too cruel. There's nothing important in that note except for the random capitalization of certain letters. If we take those capital letters and write them down, we'll get the word solstice. Entering this password will boot up the computer. The same sentient text greeted the player, telling them about their mission, but then the entity notices that something was wrong. It then realized that it had already gone through this conversation before and is shocked to find out that the player managed to return to this world. The entity then turned off the computer and the door mysteriously unlocked. Now, the rest of this gameplay is similar to the first run until the player reaches the cave area. Remember that glowing thing Niko saw in the first run? Well, now we finally get an explanation on what it was. According to Silver, that place was an old observation room. She also mentioned that there was a robot that went there a long time ago but never returned. Hearing this, Niko wanted to explore the other side of the cave but Silver stopped him because it was dangerous. It was at this moment that the journal that Niko had started glowing. When he opened it, a bright light engulfed the entire place and a minecart appeared out of nowhere. Niko was surprised to see this and asked Silver if she knew anything about it, but she just shook her head, clearly not knowing how this even happened. Niko then suggested that they go and check the other side of the cave, which Silver agrees under the condition that she accompanied him. On their way there, the player will be contacted by the entity once again. The entity was shocked that the player was able to get through the other side since he had no knowledge of this ever happening. It then demanded to know who is helping the player before realizing a moment later that the author was responsible for all of this. The entity then begged the player to turn back because it's afraid that Niko will be in danger, but before he could say anything further, the conversation was cut off. The two then arrived in an all-observation room. Silver was surprised to see that this place was still intact but was even more surprised to find out that one of the terminals is still operational despite the place not having any power. She told Niko that she wanted to investigate for a bit and that it might take some time. Niko understood and continued exploring on his own. Eventually, he entered a room and met a blue-colored robot. This robot recognized Niko and claims that he's the person that he's destined to meet. Niko couldn't understand what he meant by this but mentioned that he is oddly similar to Prophetbot. When the robot asked how he got here since the pathway was blocked a long time ago, Niko told him about the journal and how it helped him by creating a way to arrive here. The robot then asked to see the journal and after examining it, he immediately handed him his main memory disk and mentioned how Niko had passed the test and tasked him to restore his memory. It took him a while, but after being restored, the robot revealed itself to be the original Prophetbot and was called the Prototype. We'll call him Proto to make it easy. Proto explained that he was built to greet the savior of the old world. He's also annoyed that Niko compared him to the Prophetbot he met outside, since they're nothing alike. He explains that the Prophetbot outside was a dumbed-down version of himself. While Proto was a complex machine, capable of many things, the ones outside were made to be simpler to accommodate this simple world. Proto then revealed to Niko that this is not the real world, and that he had already reached the tower before and got one of the endings. He then mentioned that he's here because the player managed to bypass the one-shot mechanic and bring him back here again. Niko was shocked to hear all of this but was still skeptical of what he was told. Proto then asked Niko to concentrate and as soon as he did that, visions of the previous run emerged in his mind. Finally believing what he was told, Niko then asks why no one remembered him. Proto explains that no one remembers him because the people he met in this world are nothing more than NPCs, simulated in a universe that runs on the player's computer. Proto calls this program the World Machine. Horrified upon learning that everything was fake, Niko lashed out at the player and demanded to know why they would create such a cruel world with no way to save them. Before the player could answer back, Proto steps in and explains that Niko misunderstood what he was told. He then explains that this will be the last session because the author will attempt to fix everything and send Niko home. Proto then asks if he remembers how he arrives in Glen and suggests he do everything the same for now just to not raise any suspicion. Niko agrees and attempts to leave, but on his way out, the entity contacts the player once again and destroys the tunnel's entrance, preventing Niko from leaving. Proto anticipated this and brought them to a hidden passage. They make their way to the exit, but along the way, the entity appeared and attempted to crush them under a falling rubble. But luckily, Silver was there to stop it. She urged the two of them to go while she handles this mess, but the entity once again interfered with their escape. Realizing that both of them couldn't escape together, Proto handed over his memory disk and told him to find someone named Cedric when he gets to Glen before sacrificing himself to let Niko escape. As Niko wrote in the minecart, he began asking the player if everything that Proto said was true, that the world was nothing but a fake world created by the entity. The player answered yes, and Niko fell silent for the rest of the journey. Not long after that, Niko arrived in Glen and immediately headed towards the gate to go to the tower, but when he got to the entrance, he found out that the square glitch had blocked it, preventing him from entering. With no other way, Niko enters the ruin and went to see Calamus and Alula, who were surprised to see him down there. He explained that the gate entrance was blocked and asked if there's an alternate route to enter the tower. The siblings then tells him about the secret passage from the burial ground, but the problem is the area was flooded for some time now and there's no boat to take them there. Despite hearing that, Niko still decides to go there. When they got to that place, the book started glowing again and manifested a boat. The three of them ride the boat to the burial ground, and upon arriving there, the sibling immediately went off to visit their mother's grave, while Niko wandered around where he eventually met Cedric. Cedric explained that he was contacted by Proto to meet with Niko when he gets to Glen. When he asked what happened to Proto, Niko tearfully explained that he sacrifices his life so that he could escape, and then showed him the memory disk. As soon as he sees the memory disk, Cedric calms him down and explains that Proto can be revived since the memory disk contained all his data. Cedric then told him that they need to get to the next area soon, but the problem is the plane was missing a few parts, mainly a battery and some gears. Niko volunteered to help and goes to search for the missing parts. Once all items are obtained, Cedric wasted no time in fixing the plane. While fixing the machine, Niko learns more about this simulated world, the old world, and what the creator wanted to achieve with this final run. A few minutes later, Cedric finishes the repair and the two flies off to the refuge. They couldn't take Calamus and Alula with them since the plane only has 2 seats, but Cedric did promise them that he'll return as soon as possible to save them from being consumed by the square glitch, which has already spread throughout the burial ground. Unfortunately, as soon as they arrive at the refuge, the glitch destroys Cedric's plane. Left with no choice, the two decide to split up. Cedric would revive Proto while Niko finds Rue, the fox that Niko encountered on the first run. Now, to get down, Niko needs to use the elevator, but unlike the first run, the square glitch has destroyed the elevator. To make matters worse, it also destroyed most of the city and taken most of the residents' life, which forced the remaining survivors to take shelter inside Link's cafe. This is a pretty dire situation, but thankfully there's still hope. Remember that metal door on the first run? Well, now Niko will be able to interact with it by entering the password Solstice. This will open the door to the clock room, a massive room with 3 colored tiles on the floor. We'll come back to these tiles later. For now, Niko went straight to the elevator just next to it. After confirming that it's working properly, Niko, with a bit of help from Plight, finally was able to go down. The elevator took him down to the factory. As he exits the building, he saw Cedric running away from Kip. Before she could catch him, the square glitch separates them. Realizing that she's too late in saving him, Kip decides to turn back. She then saw Niko and immediately brought him to the library since it's safer there. Niko appreciates the help, but this isn't what he wanted. He begged to be let go, but both Kip and George refused, since the world is doomed to end either way and there's nothing left he can do. However, Niko didn't want to give up. He tells them that even though there's no hope, he still wants to try and save the world. Moved by what he said, both of them allowed him to leave. Continuing on his journey, Niko eventually found Rue. This time, instead of avoiding him, Rue was eagerly waiting for him. She was excited to see Niko and asked if he already met the other two. Before Niko could explain what happened to them, Rue cuts him off and told him that they need to hurry and return to the clock room. Upon arriving there, Rue was shocked to learn that Cedric and Proto didn't quote-unquote survive. Devastated, the two went to the rooftop to grieve on their losses. Here, Niko learns why the world was on the verge of being destroyed. Devastated, the two of them went. He also learned what the term taming meant here. Essentially, taming means caring for the robot as if it was a real person. This will in turn grant them free will. After this conversation, the two decide to talk for a bit more before the square glitch appears, forcing them to go down. On their way down, they stumble into Cedric and Proto, who apparently survived the factory's explosion and were looking for them as well. With all three of them present, they are ready to confront the entity and finally return Niko home. Now remember those color tiles we saw a while ago? Well, now we get to learn what they are. According to Rue, these color tiles are called code portals. And the way they work is pretty amazing. By standing on these color tiles, their data will appear on the player's computer in 3 separate documents, each labeled as Portal 1, 2, and 3. Inside each respective folders, there are 3 files: an image of the characters, the sprite for the character, and a text file with the label key B, G, and R. Moving this text file to a folder labeled Big Portal will make all 3 of them disappear in the game. When you return to the game, you can see them appearing somewhat glitched for a few seconds before disappearing, revealing a hidden door that leads Niko into the author's room. Stepping inside, Niko will see the same X symbol on the floor. This is a hint for the player to exit the game. Upon relaunching the game, we then see Niko being surrounded by various CCTV monitors, each of them capturing Niko's adventures in this world. Following the error sign, Niko eventually comes face to face with the entity. The entity took on Niko's form and explained that he never meant to harm him. He then explains about the old world, how he messed up and how much he regretted what he did back then. The entity then explained how Niko wasn't supposed to return because after he put the sun, Niko was supposed to go back home. But because of his programming malfunctioning, Niko was forced into a life and death decision that ended up costing his life. Feeling sympathy for him, Niko suggested that the entity should have just reconstructed the real good ending from scratch. The entity was hesitant because he was afraid of failing again, but Niko reassured him that he could do it and that he'll be here for him. After hearing all of that, the entity agrees and handed him the sun. He asked Niko to put the sun back where it belonged while he worked on the code. The entity then contacted the player one last time, telling the player that he had managed to bring back all of the NPCs they had lost due to the square glitch. The entity asked the player to let Niko meet them one last time before saying goodbye. The credits then roll in the background while Niko traversed through it. True to what the entity said, all of the lost NPCs are back and Niko is able to interact with them one last time. At the end of this long pathway, Niko met Cedric, Rue, and Proto one last time. The 3 of them congratulated him for making it to the end. They then talk a bit more before saying goodbye to him. Niko then entered the open door which took him to the tower where he put the sun back in its place. The same ending plays out where the sun is restored and then cuts to the room where Niko woke up for the first time. Except this time, Niko was present. After saying goodbye to the player, the game ends with Niko walking into the light and out of the game world. I mean literally out of the game world. This is honestly one of the coolest endings a game could have done. To start things off, in the old world, scientists discovered that a cataclysmic event would happen soon and bring about the end of the world. As the scientists tried their hardest to stop the apocalypse, they heard a vague prophecy where a Messiah would come and save them all. This became everyone's hope and everyone wanted to know when this Messiah would come. The author, who is a genius scientist, built the first prophet bot, who we now know as Proto, to predict when the Messiah would arrive. But instead of getting good news, Proto calculated that the Messiah would not be born in time to save the world. This destroyed all their motivation, and from that point on, everyone just gave up on everything and waited for the apocalypse. But one person refused to give up, and that person is the author. He gathered a few of the scientists who still hadn't given up and created the World Machine. A machine that is built to replicate their old world. He did this by collecting all the data from every living person, and after heavily modifying it, he compiled them into codes. This is how the new world was created, but the machine needed to borrow the mental processing power of a living being. At first, the author uses his own mind for that, and during the development/testing phase, the World Machine's AI somehow gained sentience. This is how the entity was born. Now during the test run, the entity would intentionally jumble up the codes, messing up some part of the world here and there, and even messing around some of the NPCs. The square glitch was the result of that. He did this because he was curious and figured the author would eventually notice what he did and fix his mess. But that never happened. You see, because of the entity's curiosity where it constantly messed around the system, this made the testing a bit stressful for the author since he had to stop and restart the test over and over again, and coupled with the fact that they were running against time, you can guess what happened. Before the author could fix every mistake the entity did, the old world was destroyed. This caused the entity to go into panic mode because it had lost connection with the author. Now you might be wondering, if the machine needed to borrow the mental processing of a living being, then how was it able to power it on if the author is gone? See, this is where it gets interesting. The world machine was able to do this because the AI not only gained sentience, but also because the author managed to program it on a separate code and stored it as an installation file / program. Yeah, that program is none other than our game Oneshot. Now because it's now a program, every time we run it on our computer, it uses that as its own processing power, allowing it to function like it was before the old world ended. But here's where things get even more interesting. We knew that the new world was based on the old world, and what happened in that old world before it was destroyed? They were waiting for a messiah. Now the entity has a soft spot for humans. We can see that it cares about Niko in the Solstice route, but against the entity's wishes, the programming forced it to summon Niko in order to save their world. This doesn't sit well with the entity, and time again it tries to fight the program. Remember this part because we'll get back to it later. So the entity tried again throughout the first round but failed miserably because Niko loved the NPCs living there, which made him sacrifice his life for some computer codes. But then Niko gets summoned again for the second time. The entity knows it has a chance this time and tries even harder to fight the program, which is why we're seeing the square glitch or corruption coming up even faster than in the first run. But Niko pushes on and eventually confronts the entity. Finally facing one-on-one, the entity tries to force Niko to give up, but Niko refuses and offers a solution where the entity fixes everything. The entity would refuse at first, but remember how it tried to fight the program? You see, in this world there's a term called taming. That's when a robot is given enough care and love that it develops free will and sentience, which the entity already had even before Niko was even here on the first run. I mean, why would an AI like the entity care and develop curiosity? He was already tame way before that. So realizing that, the entity fixed the ending and finally gave Niko the happy ending he deserves. But then that leaves us another question. What about Niko? Sure, he was needed there when we opened the computer because the entity needed the messiah to save the world, but where did he come from? See, this is the most puzzling thing ever since there's no info on him. The bio did mention that he's the protagonist and an unfortunate victim of the forces set by the world machine, but we don't know anything beyond that. So I did a bit of research and found a thread talking about Niko's origin, and it's really fascinating. It's a long thread which you can read if you want to, but basically Niko came from a parallel universe where anthropomorphic animals live in a similar environment to Earth and behave like humans. Now, there's a game demo before Oneshot made by Nightmargin called Bless You Rip, where the main character is an anthropomorphic rabbit living in a world filled with anthropomorphic animals. Yeah, with all of that evidence, I can definitely say that Niko was pulled from that world. Niko is a cat and lives in a world where the game Bless You Rip took place. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is one of the best RPG Maker game I've ever played. The fourth wall breaking is so well executed. It doesn't feel weird or out of place. I like how the way the true ending plays out where Niko jumps out of the game world and down to your taskbar. That is so crazy to think about it. If I were to see this back when it first came out, I would freak out. You know, I have this game on my channel for a while now. It's like the oldest upload you can find here, but truthfully, I didn't remember much of it. It was only recently that I went back and rewatched it that I realized how much the game had changed. I mean, I didn't know the library used to be this huge back in the old version. Crazy. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. We are so close to 100k subscribers, so I want to take this chance to say thank you for supporting this channel. It means a lot to me, and if you made it to the end, let's confuse the people who didn't watch until this very end by commentating, "I can't believe Redelish 2 did that." Also, if you enjoyed this channel, subscribe to see more content like this. Like the video if you enjoyed it, check out my previous video if you haven't yet. That's all for me. See you.